Maybe you bring me one. Hash bar? I don't think there's any IETF process requirement. It's a variety. Get started soon. 6 is the hour. All right, we are at the hour, everybody. Welcome to OHAI. OHAI. Welcome to the working group. We're going to talk about Oblivious HTTP application intermediation, how we add more privacy to HTTP requests. Taro Kivinen. Taro. Thank you. All right, let's get some work done. Siobhan, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Hey all. Please note this well. It's a reminder of the IETF policies in effect on various topics. By participating at the IETF, whether remotely or in person, you agree to follow these, and these are extremely important. Please do read through them. And sorry, I wanted to say more stuff about this. Please also note that we have an ombuds team, and Pete and I are here in person and happy to talk about anything. And also we have folks who can, feel free in general to talk, to reach out to anyone if you notice something. And yeah, we take this very seriously. All right, meeting tips. If you're in person, please make sure to sign into the session using the QR code, or if you're using the client, that'll take care of that. But it's really important to do this so that we get an appropriately sized room. And then if you're remote, please make sure that your audio and video are off unless you are presenting or speaking, and we recommend using a headset. All right, we have a note taker. Thank you, Sean. I'll paste in a link to the notes. And we have one draft on our list. Tommy will be talking about chunked OHTTP. And yeah, Tommy, you want to take it away?
I assume we have no agenda bashes at this point. Everyone's cool, just listening to Tommy talk for a little while. Cool.
Sorry.
I'll ask for it again.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the end of Tuesday. Hopefully we're all still awake. I'm Tommy Pauly, and I'm co-authoring this document with Martin Thompson. We've talked about it a couple times before. This is on the third revision of being a working group document. And I have, I guess, good news and bad news of we're getting closer to being done, but one of the parts of being closer to being done means we have added a dependency on an unadopted document elsewhere. So we'll get into that. I'm not trying to just keep it open forever, but we'll see.
Yeah, just to fast forward, the question at the end of this is going to be, aren't we done yet? And can we close? So let's get to you focus on conclusion.
Right. So I think the answer may be we're almost done, but we're almost at the point where we can probably stop meeting unless there's other things that come up, but we probably won't be able to publish immediately.
I mean, if we can get it through the IESG and have it sit in MISREF, that's fine.
We'll have to see. Okay, so first, just a recap of what chunked OHTTP is. So if you take normal Oblivious HTTP, essentially it's the same thing as that, except that you get to have your encryption and decryption of the request and response be delivered in separate chunks. This is something that HPKE, which is used for the request encryption, natively is able to support. And there's a simple modification to how the encryption of the response is handled as well. I want to emphasize that in our discussion previously, this is still just a single HTTP request and response transaction. The point is just to be able to deliver and process that incrementally if that is necessary for your application. And the goal is to not really change any of the other properties. It is not meant for a live, interactive, bidirectional channel over time. It is not a replacement for an end-to-end TLS session. And as I talked about previously in Vancouver, one of the use cases we have here is dealing with a request and response for a potentially large or slow to generate generative AI LLM response that normally kind of trickles in, but is still a single response that you're getting, and you want to be able to trickle it in and still show something and show some responsiveness. Okay. So in the latest revision, we made some progress. We closed 2 of our issues. One of them we'll talk about more on a different slide, and this is talking about the guidance for incremental processing on the relays. This is something we discussed a fair amount last time in Vancouver, and we picked one of the solutions. And so we want to see, do people think this is good? Do they like the direction here? The other thing that we closed that I can just summarize here is just reiterating some of the security properties. There's discussion around perfect forward secrecy, and overall, chunked OHTTP does not change those cryptographic security properties. It does not add perfect forward secrecy. In normal Oblivious HTTP, with HPKE there, you do not have forward secrecy until the key changes. That is still the case here. So we just warning people, don't assume that incremental processing makes it act like TLS. That's not what this is. Okay, so the bigger change is the one that introduces this dependency on a different draft. So is potentially a process headache, but architecturally is cleaner, and I think this is a nice direction. So there's a draft that Kazuho wrote up, and Martin and I joined onto it to support that. This is, as is currently described in Kazuho's draft in HTTP, as well as this one referencing it, is a simple header field that at this point is just a Boolean value that you just mark like incremental 1, which is the Boolean true in structured fields. And this is a signal that can be added either to requests or responses or both, and it is meant to indicate to intermediaries, to HTTP intermediaries, that the sender is requesting that the content be delivered incrementally. Now, the point of this for Oblivious HTTP specifically is that we have an HTTP intermediary inherently in the protocol. There is the Oblivious relay, which is receiving the outer encrypted post request and response. And we found that in practice, many post intermediary implementations do buffer up the requests and responses. And this is not unique to Oblivious HTTP, as Kazuho explained in his slides from the HTTP session on Monday. This happens for various cases, gRPC, things like that. And in those cases, generally the solution has been the same as what we initially did on implementation. You just kind of yell at your intermediary and say, please stop buffering. And it's a very manual process. And initially, when things are not working like you expect, when you are doing this chunking to be able to do incremental processing and you see it kind of wait for a long time, it's not necessarily immediately obvious what's going on until you get further into debugging it. So the point of this is that we can have an explicit signal to the intermediaries, tell them to do incremental delivery. And the draft also talks about ways to signal failures to do that. So in the case of chunked OHTTP, kind of the only reason to be doing chunking is that you want incremental delivery. Otherwise, there's really no point of it. So you could, for example, handle a case where you mark the incremental header flag, and you could get a rejection from the server and then realize that this server does not support that, and then you could use normal Oblivious HTTP. So that's the overall solution space there. Now, what I will note is that this document is pretty brand new. It's not adopted yet. HTTP may call for adoption on it. We need, and it may adopt it. That would be very nice for this draft, but it can also evolve. So I think one of the concerns about pushing this document ahead too fast is if we go through the process and then the header dramatically changes in some regard. That would be something we wouldn't necessarily want to have gone over to the ISG. However, a status for this is that we could kind of finish all the other open issues, park this and depend on that, and then kind of re-kick it through the process once the incremental work has at least stabilized.
So Tommy, could you clarify why this is a dependency as opposed to just something that would make things better and make better usage of this feature?
It doesn't strictly have to be a dependency. You can do the old trick of yelling at your relay and say, do this. However, this is definitely clean, and I would say in the case that this were already an RFC, we would absolutely have a normative reference to it that says you should do this.
But still should, you must do
No,
this.
I don't think it's a must, because there can certainly be a deployment where you already know and you don't like those extra bytes because you're a byte miser.
Right. So I mean, it seems like this could be probably an informational requirement.
It could.
So
The downside there is that if we have examples with it, and then the format totally changes, but maybe we just reference it informationally. So
fair.
We can work it out. I think. Let's see how long it takes to finish everything else, and then we can evaluate then.
Sure.
I'm just bringing this up as a process thing. So I guess on this, are there any comments or concerns or thoughts? And I would encourage people to read Kazuho's draft, which is mentioned here, draft Kazuho, HTTP BIS, incremental HTTP.
We have a couple people in the queue. Jonathan Hoyland.
Hi. There we go. So I don't know if this has been answered somewhere, but as somebody who did the security analysis of the non-incremental version, this totally invalidates my analysis of the security of the obliviousness of OHAI, of HTTP, sorry. So what have we actually had any thoughts as to whether this forwarding incrementally actually fundamentally breaks the security?
So my last slide of the last things to do is that we need help on redoing the formal analysis. So can we we essentially have two issues. One is test vectors, and that's just a matter of us getting around to not being lazy. But the kind of rerunning the analysis would be great, and I would love to have help on that if possible.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the property becomes very weird and unclear what you mean when it's incremental. Because basically, if you're trying to do indistinguishability, the bad actor can just delay one of the incremental responses and see which one gets delayed on the other side. You can do statistical attacks basically quite easily.
Could you not? So you're talking about a timing attack. So I send, let's say I just send one single request that's non-chunked, or it's a complete thing. You send me back the response in 3 pieces. What do I do with the attack?
So let's say Well, no, it's not if you send it in 3 pieces. It's if I'm still sending data upload whilst getting the response back. So let's say I have a really big query and the server has a really big response, and it starts incrementally processing my query and returning me the results before I finish sending all my query.
That is specifically talking about interleaving the request and response.
Yeah.
Right. I agree that that has very different properties, but that is not
Allowed by incremental?
So this is one of the issues we have open. Like, it is not a must not. Like, essentially, it's like a warning of like, if you do that, it totally changes your properties of identifiability. So it's kind of like a should not, or I mean, that's one of the things I'd like to get feedback on. But I think for the purpose of analysis, I think the first most interesting thing will be to just analyze the chunking without interleaving, just using incremental delivery on either side.
Okay, sounds interesting.
Tommy, did you want to take the questions at the end, or did you want to?
No,
This is good.
I mean, ideally, if the questions are about the incremental delivery bit, that would be wonderful, because we have other stuff to talk about. But please, Peter.
Piotr Sikora. So one comment on this slide is that while intermediaries usually buffer the request, they almost never buffer the response. And I'm not sure if that makes it easier for your use case or not.
I don't, in the sample of 3 or 4 that I saw, I don't know if that was true consistently. We definitely saw some that were buffering responses.
Okay.
I believe you that it's more likely in one direction, but it's still a problem.
Yeah, and the second comment on what Jonathan just said, if we are using the generic incremental HTTP header, then like interleaving is almost like the property of it, right? So we would need to add specific text here to prevent interleaving from happening.
Right. If you want to prohibit interleaving, you need to explicitly do that. Correct.
So, Martin Thompson, to the point that Jonathan raises, there's been some informal analysis of what's going on, but certainly formal would be better.
Formal is good.
And that's why we're still here talking about it rather than having shipped a document, I think, for the most part. There's the interactivity question that I think we've gone back and forth on to varying degrees, and I think we probably do need some clearer guidance about what it is that we expect from an interactivity perspective, as opposed to just like the example that you shared, which was simply incremental processing of requests and responses. The fact that you can combine incremental requests and incremental responses and get interactivity is actually in many ways a misfeature of the design, and it causes a lot of problems because you can leak the distance to the client, which is something you weren't able to do otherwise.
Exactly.
You can create situations where the replayability of the requests is now something that can be exploited by a bad relay, by virtue of having that interactivity involved. Now,
then that's one of the
it would
slides we'll
require
talk about.
huge amount of contrived, like it would probably require a massively contrived example to sort of drive that home, but there are all these possibilities there. So an outright prohibition may be a little bit too much,
right?
Because I'm thinking about informational responses, for instance, which is one of the things this enables.
Right.
I don't want to completely rule that out, but and certainly 100 continue is one of the ones that sort of falls into that bucket. But we have to be very careful about what guidance we give. We've tried, but we need to work on that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'm currently leaning towards it's like a should not. Here's a ton of warnings about all the assumptions that you lose when you do that. I think it's just one other subtle point, which I think we've talked about before in this group. And Jonathan, I think it would be interesting to do the analysis on this as well. One could imagine that the incremental delivery of request and response chunks could, so there's a version where they are completely disjoint. There's a version on the other extreme where the request processing and timing is based on the response chunks coming in. They're just like fully interactive. There's a potential middle ground where you just keep doing exactly what you were doing on the request chunks. That it just happens to be colliding and timing with what's going on the other side. And if you do not change your behavior at all, that is potentially different properties than what you'd have in either of the other two extremes. Lucas.
Hi, Lucas Pardew. Yeah, just responding to Jonathan's point, I'm not a informal or formal analysis expert by any means, but I was just a bit confused because my understanding from Kazua's presentation is this flag is just kind of a signal to kind of make explicit what proxies do anyway. So if the prior analysis didn't factor in the fact that I might buffer or not buffer, then maybe it was missing something. But I could be wrong here.
My interpretation is that Jonathan's comment is a little bit more about just the whole notion of being chunked and delivering incrementally, not really just this header. This header is just a stronger indication that, you know, relay, please do the thing that I wanted you to do.
Okay.
And Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, just to respond directly to that. When you can only have one, when the request is one blob and the response is one blob, they can't be interleaved at all because there's only one. So that's.
But that is a distinction between non-chunked and chunked, not between the header that tells the relay to please make sure.
Okay. So yeah. So my
incrementally deliver my chunks, which is what I wanted you to do anyway.
Yeah, I guess it's
Subtle.
It's a thing of chunkedness.
Yes.
Hi, Ben Schwartz. I know I'm covering old ground here, but I do feel like I can't let this go by without reiterating. Like this seems, even if you rule out all the interleaving, this seems much less privacy preserving than Oblivious HTTP, and the advantages of this over like pre-existing systems for tunneling TLS seem very, very small. In particular, the timing attacks here are incredibly powerful. You know, you mentioned LLM responses as an example. You know, if in the typical flow of that, you know, there's a chunk for like every single word coming off of the model over a period of several seconds. That creates a pattern of packets on the server to relay hop, and then the same pattern of packets on the relay to client hop. So a purely passive adversary has a really good chance of correlating those in a way that was not at all true with Oblivious HTTP. And then if you imagine active adversaries who are able to perturb those timings and observe if those perturbations hold on the other end, that becomes even stronger. So I'm not sure what to do about this exactly. I understand like this is a real thing that we need to do somehow, but just, you know, having some recognition that once you step into this territory, you've lost a lot of the protections that we're trying to achieve.
So on that, I understand that you say like, okay, I could have one response that's coming back to someone that is 50 tiny chunks at a particular time interval, and the other response could have 20 tiny chunks at a particular time interval between them or whatever. If we are assuming that you have relatively low enough traffic that you can, from the outside, see that, right? So like on the, because there's going to be generally a shared connection.
Yeah. So I think that
Like
The way I think about this is Oblivious HTTP has an implicit assumption that there's some basically pooling and shuffling going on. Maybe not explicitly, but at least accidentally through the nature of the protocols. There's a bunch of messages that come back in one flow, and they don't just come out in the same order on the other end. There's some difficulty in figuring out which one was which.
Right. Or
I think that when
have
you
a constant rate of similar sized packets going between the relay and the gateway, more or less.
So a constant rate is not good enough, right? You need reordering in order to have any defense.
Why?
Otherwise, I just pair them up. This one goes in, and then it was this one on the other end. If it takes a constant delay across the relay, then all I have to do is figure out what that delay is, and the rate doesn't matter.
You are assuming that the attacker is the gateway itself, observing the links between the relay and all clients.
I'm assuming that the attacker is the endpoint resource. I've forgotten my terminology here, and has a tap on the downstream side of the proxy of the relay.
Because I think one of the properties here is that oftentimes, because you have somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat dedicated relays for gateways, like the identity of the gateway is far less interesting than the content of the message within the gateway.
Right. And so the point is the gateway knows the content, and the gateway knows the content. Can they place a tap on the network near the relay in order to learn the client identities, which the relay is supposed to hide from them? And I think my concern really is that I think that the loss of privacy here, as you add chunks, is, depending on your modeling, exponential. That if you add 10 chunks, it becomes 1,000 times easier to identify, to make the linkage there, to like pierce through the noise in the links and perform the correlation. That's a heuristic claim, but I think that we should be scared. Basically, that's my position.
I don't totally see it being an exponential degradation, and I guess I'd also point out that, like, and I believe normal Oblivious HTTP RFC mentions this, but you can certainly, if you have just response sizes and timings, if those are relatively unique, that it would also be possible to do that same type of attack. So doing a traffic analysis, if the gateway is able to observe all links to all clients, already has concerns. And I believe that the overall techniques of trying to make the sizes very consistent, to potentially reorder things and to normalize the timing could apply to both cases, although I agree that it's more involved if you want to do that fully in the chunked case.
Thibaut Meunier, Cloudflare. Have a question specifically on the incremental header. In its current form of the draft mentioned a specific version of like the incremental header, which only allows for 1 bit. Do you see as incremental header like evolves, if like there starts to be like more values or like difference between like request and response, some updates that would have to be done to like these draft?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't think we can, like, if we're referencing it, I don't think we can ship this until that stabilizes. Okay. Because if the format changes, that's bad. Now, hopefully that one stabilizes relatively quickly and we just kind of wait for it.
Okay, maybe a follow-up question on that. The incremental header, like in this state, has like clear like properties, I think. If there are like more headers, would that also change like the privacy properties that like the clients or like the system as a whole would provide?
If there are more headers related to this or more other headers?
If there are more headers, like I think at the moment the draft mentioned that like the client sends an incremental header and does not mention like the specific value because it's up to the draft of incremental header.
Currently, the way the incremental header is defined in the currently published draft, it has exactly 1 legal value.
Yes, I agree. That's why.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, yes, this is why just like referencing it without potentially updating it would be problematic because if the shape changes such that it's no longer fit for purpose here, that could be bad. I think in this case, you would just like very simply say all clients that ever send this content type also send that same header, and it really changes nothing of the properties. If that was not the case, that would be potentially a concern.
Thank you.
Someone asked me to get on in the queue, so I did. I don't know what they wanted me to say. So Ben's concern is kind of real, but I think the concern or the cause of that concern is misplaced. The cause of that concern is actually the existence of the incremental header field, which has applications outside of this particular very narrow scenario. As we talked about in the HTTP meeting earlier this week, the problem here is that if you have a malicious gateway in the way that he described, and the relay is respecting the incremental header field, they can do this whether it's chunked or not, because it's about the delivery of the bytes.
That's
and
true.
The gateway could construct a large message and then chop it up into little pieces and deliver it in, with very specific timing gaps and very specific message sizes, and that information would pass through a gateway if it was delivered incrementally. And so we have to be aware of that. Now, it might be that your response to that is to say that in Oblivious HTTP, the relay has to buffer. And that's a reasonable response. It also puts a nail in this particular draft, right? And I think it's kind of unrealistic, because the sorts of things that we're trying to deal with here are large responses or incrementally generated things that where the privacy properties are reasonably well understood. And so that this can be abused is not necessarily a reason to say that it's no good, period, right? Because there is always the possibility that it could be used responsibly. And that's something that we have to be aware of. This is one of those situations where the privacy properties of the system depend to some extent on the cooperation of the entities involved. And to a large extent, that's the entire story with Oblivious HTTP. The whole point of putting up a service behind an Oblivious HTTP relay is specifically because you are concerned about privacy and you want to put in place some technical mechanisms to avoid that. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe this is something that puts a lie to the commitment that you make, but I think I'm less concerned about this than sort of the hemming and hawing that I'm hearing from Ben there.
And following up to that, I think that's all very good points, and I agree. I feel to some degree that there is a class of protections when you have partitioned streams or proxy streams, relay streams for privacy, of trying to solve the fingerprinting and timing attacks. That it's not that it's just a research area, but it is an area that needs improvement for all of the technologies we have, right? And like, even if you were just talking about Connect style TLS proxy or a mask proxy or whatever, you have the same problem because you still can see the timing of the packets going through. So anytime you do that, like, you can theoretically do it well. I think we need to do a lot more analysis to understand, can we make strong claims about like, oh, this is bulletproof? That's a whole other level. I mean, I think that's a lot of work to be done for this, as well as normal OHTTP, as well as other proxying schemes. And we should do it, but probably not here.
Yeah.
Yaroslav Rosomachos, Zscaler. When I believe in original Oblivious HTTP RFC, it vaguely, somewhat vaguely says that Oblivious relay can introduce padding to add additional entropy.
Correct.
So I wonder if this additional random padding can help with the issue of correlation, especially for chunked use case when you have multiple request responses and maybe some messages with nothing but padding to introduce additional noise could help. And if that is the case, then maybe the chunked version of Oblivious HTTP should have stronger language when it comes to this padding should or must, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I don't want to like nerd snipe us all too much, but like you can certainly go down the road of, you know, addressing Ben's concerns by saying, okay, yes, it's padding plus making sure that you're normalizing the timing and that you send back the same number of chunks to all clients at known particular cadences. Like that's the type of thing and analysis you have to do, which gets deeper. And I think we should ensure that we're not preventing that from happening. I believe we aren't preventing that from being the case. But it does take a lot of work, no matter which privacy solution you're doing, to really say like, yep, we solved it. Okay. I can't see who else is in queue. Are we done?
I think we're done.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good feedback. Okay, so other remaining issues. Some of these we've talked about before. And so for these, I will recap the previous discussion we had, explain how the authors did not have a chance to actually implement that text, but confirm what we want to do in case there are any concerns. And this was based on me looking at the previous discussion we had. So there's one about negotiating use. How do you know that as a client that your relay and gateway support chunked? The general gist of the discussion at 119 was that we have the media type, it's different, that's enough to signal what's being used. Generally, you should just try with the media type you have. Normally, you would kind of know that in this configuration for this gateway, this is what you're going to be using, and so you just do it. I think we need some text around that, and so roughly the proposal I was thinking of here was to say that if you know you need to use chunked OHTTP for a particular use case in a particular gateway, you just use it. This is probably the 95% case. You just say, here's the media type, and if it fails, something is totally wrong. It's like as if the server didn't support Oblivious HTTP in the first place, because this is what you were configured to do. If there do exist cases where you would want to use it opportunistically, where you know that the server supports OHTTP and you are interested in doing chunked, if you want, you can essentially just try with the media type. And then we have to add a note that unless you're doing some consistency checks to make sure that other clients are seeing the same thing, you could get differentiated behavior of some clients get chunked, some clients get non-chunked, and that can lead to two different populations that could be distinguished. Not good there. And then also for simplicity, I think that it would be good to just say that if you use chunked on the request, the gateway must use chunked on the response to avoid some combinatorial explosion of things that are really not all that useful. Any thoughts, concerns here?
That last point seems like a no-brainer, right? Because you can only send a single chunk if you want to use the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I think it's a no-brainer, but it wasn't explicitly said. Now I think we need to just say it. Ted.
Ted Hardy. I have a question. I'm not quite sure where in the presentation to ask it, so I'm going to ask it here because we've just mentioned the possibility of sending a single chunk, and that is have you already registered the media type or taken it to the media types list?
No.
Okay. There's a question that kind of occurred to me rereading this and thinking, because I reread it shortly after rereading Resumable Upload, and that is it possible to have a fragment identifier associated with one of these chunks? And obviously, if you were constructing a URI, a fragment identifier is like the thing after the pound, and a media type tells you what that fragment identifier means. And it would be perfectly possible to construct a URI that used this media type where the nonce was referenced by this fragment identifier, and it would be a horrifically terrible idea. No. The more I thought about it, was like, oh, please, we have to figure out some way in this to make sure that people don't do that.
Great.
And so if you haven't already taken it to the media types list, I strongly suggest when you do, you ask them what the incantation is that says fragment, this media type does not support fragmentation. Because you are in fact fragmenting it, and somebody who's like used to resumable upload or something else could come across this and go, oh, obviously this is what a fragment in this media type means is.
No.
But you really don't want to do that.
That's correct. That's a great point. Great point.
Please, when you're talking to them, figure out what that incantation is. If they don't have one, make one up and make it a strong one. Thank you.
Okay. Please note that in the notes, because that's a great idea. Thank you. Okay. Moving on. We talked about a maximum chunk size in the discussion that we had previously. I think we came to the conclusion that what we really want is a minimum maximum chunk size. So this is about interoperability and essentially saying that if you don't know otherwise what size of chunk the other side would support, you should have, like, there should be a generic default maximum chunk size that is the minimum maximum chunk size that any implementation must support. If you are not confused yet, good on you. We talked about, we just need to pick a bike shed number. So like one proposal would be implementations must support 2 to the 16 byte chunk sizes as what you're willing to buffer, and that you should limit your chunk sizes to that unless you know for some reason that you have to use bigger ones. I guess this technically also applies to normal unchunked OHTTP, because what if you just send something really, really, really big and the other side doesn't like that? That would just fail today. This could also just fail, but this is a nice interoperability recommendation. Any thoughts? Min max, good. You don't like the number? I knew it.
64K should be enough.
I don't think this is quite a bike shed sort of thing, but 65K is quite large. It might be that we can go with the TLS size, which was chosen
16,
which is 16K rather than 64. Just, I mean, maybe this is a different world we live in now, but I don't think really we need larger record sizes. The overhead at that point is negligible. What's that, 1,000 to 1? I think we can tolerate that.
Right. Okay, that's fine. This is, it was kind of randomly picked as like, it's not ridiculously large, but it's pretty large still. Okay, fine. 16K. If anyone has a problem with that, please pile on to the bike shed. Okay. Then we also have a issue that I pulled text out of some comments that Martin had wrote. I think this we can kind of use as one of the inlets to really expanding the text and security concerns around interactivity. We've already discussed a bunch of these. This one's particularly about replayability. I don't know, Martin, if you want to describe the particular scenario, but it's up here. So I think we just need to describe various scenarios that occur if you are allowing yourself to be interactive when you're chunking, and say, be careful. Okay. So then, apart from those issues, which they have some meaty work in them, but we can certainly work on that. I think the big things are getting the test vectors, getting the formal analysis. Would love to have Jonathan's help or someone else's help if he's not available. We want to do more interop testing. We've actually done a fair amount, but I think Martin's updating his reference implementation, so we'll be able to add that into the mix. And then there's this whole dependency on incremental and how that goes. Apart from that, we could be done if the working group thinks so. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Tommy. Any more comments from the floor? Other issues on people's mind about this draft? Are we at the point where we should start soliciting reviews, or do we want to close a few more PRs first?
I think I'd love to, actually, we should get through this round of those like 3 issues. And then I think it would be in pretty good shape modulo the formal analysis and test vectors.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's the last topic we had. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you.
I'll put out a call here for any other business for the good of the order. Seeing no one running to the mics, we are adjourned. Thank you for your time this evening.